Hello and welcome to this overview video for Trapcode Elements version 1.3. So in this video we'll go over some of the project files, have a look at the categories and discuss a few pieces of general knowledge that is useful just to help get started with the projects, get familiar with the layouts, and just discuss the tutorials that are available and any issues surrounding compatibility to make sure you have the best experience. So we have the same layout that we're used to in the project. When you download it, you have a folder containing all of the assets. For example, we have all the geometry. The Earthbending category includes a lot of custom rocks that are used. We have the basic OBJ shapes that are used very often, like a sphere. We have some of the sprites that are used in some of the projects. So it's very useful just to know where all of those files are. For example, the pre-rendered heat distortion that's used. So that's where you'll find all of those. And then if we come to After Effects, I'm using CC 2018. But if we open up one of these categories, you'll see that there is a 2018 and 2014 version. So if you're using After Effects CC 2014 or any update in between there, like CC 2017, or if you're using 2018, you can use this, or if you're using CC 2020, you can also use this version and that will work just fine as well. So Trapcode Elements is a collection of presets for Trapcode Particular, and to use Trapcode Elements without any issues, we need to have Trapcode Particular version 4.1.5 installed. So this is the updates gallery for Red Giant's Trapcode Particular. So back when they released version 4, that's when they added the dynamic fluids, and that's when we started developing Trapcode Elements. And right now we're using these versions here, so the latest version before the new standalone release of version 5. So these are all updates of version 4. And it's compatible for this version here. It's not yet compatible with version 5 because they've made some pretty major changes to the way that the emission systems are set up. So it's not yet compatible with version 5. You need to use this one here, version 4.1.5. So if you have installed version 5, which is what I did when I was testing it, I found that the feature that they included to migrate projects over to the newer version didn't always work, so I reverted my installation back to version 4 that I had. So to do that, you can go Support Installers, the Updates page, Trapcode Particular, and I simply went back to this version, downloaded it for Windows, and reinstalled version 4.1.5. And if you prefer to uninstall the version that you have, so you can just uninstall version 5 here, download the installer, and download version 4. As it will replace the installation, so you can't have version 5 installed and version 4.1 installed. It will always replace the version that you have. So we are planning to make it compatible with version 5, but in the meantime you want to use this version to ensure that you don't have any compatibility issues. As it is quite a large pack with a lot of projects, we've included a helpful series of tutorial files. So if you go to CG Visuals, #VFX on YouTube, we put quite a lot of work into making these tutorials here, and this video is an overview of everything that we do in the tutorials, and these tutorials were actually made for version 1.2, so we've actually improved the way the water looks even more, added even more features, but this is just a small taste of what you can create. This is what we specifically focus on with the tutorials. Quite ambitious exercises just to really show you what's possible. So once you've downloaded, you don't have to figure out everything yourself. You can start going through those tutorials, put a lot of work into making them interesting, time efficient, so that by the time you've gone through one of the videos, you'll have a great shot that looks nice, so you have a good result at the end of it. Okay, so let's go into some of the projects and have a look. So we've put quite a lot of work into the water. The version 1.2 update did improve the water, but we just kept going back over it and just thinking of ways that we can make it more realistic. And the category that got the most work and attention was these 3D water effects. So any project that has the word manipulation in it is a 3D particle simulation of water. So if we open up water ball manipulation, I consider this to be sort of the go-to water bending effect when anyone's trying to bend water. So we'll open up this one. Although we won't have time to open up all of the projects, they all have the same layout. So if I discuss principles in one of the projects, then that will apply to the rest of them. For example, they all have this layout as standard. There's an export comp where everything to do with compositing is done in here. A particles comp, which is where you do all of your simulation effects. And at first, it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but when you go through these, you'll see these repeated quite a lot. So there's color tone, color amount. You want to apply a general tint to the effect. This is how bright the specular highlights are here, so we can see a nice example of a specular highlight there. You've got the water drops brightness, so the cascading water that's coming off, we can change that. I suppose I should probably change some of these effects while we're discussing them. Let's take a quick snapshot, go back. So you can see there we took all of the brightness away from the water drops there. So the red values means that they're capped between 0 and 100, so you can't go too far in the wrong direction. How dark or bright you want the water to be. Normally I don't stray too far away from their default values because they are sort of optimized. But you know, if you're in a bright scene or a dark scene, these effects here will probably be more apparent if we bring in an image to use as a background. So we can really talk about some of these effects. So I've got some stock images here, so I'm just going to bring in this overcast image here. Has some nice lighting in it, so I'll bring this in here, just make sure it's the right size. I will let this cache in first. We're working at half res here, so when you're ready for a full quality render you can go to full res. Does take a bit longer though, because that's where everything's really being calculated to provide a nice crisp image. So it's very rare that I'll work in full res until I'm ready to do a render. So for example, if we were to render about 5 or 6 seconds of this, we might be looking at a render time at full res of about an hour, possibly 2 hours. Which I don't mind though, because I'm confident that I'll get a result that is worth the time that I've waited for. Water is something that's extremely difficult to simulate, and so using Trapcode elements again and again on different projects, it's just nice to know that you have the ability to create realistic water, and all the refractions and the highlights will all look great. Okay, and so take a quick snapshot of that so we can see. Going to full res does. See, it really brings out all of the details, all of the little surface ripples. So we'll leave that at full res, and then we've got this reflection comp here. So by default it's using the placeholder image, so we want to copy and paste our overcast placeholder image in here. It will generate some reflections to be used. We'll go back into here. It's going to update again, and this way the water will inherit some of the colors. It's definitely more obvious when the lighting's a bit more, so you can see there it just inherited some of that overcast sky and incorporated that into the water, which is great. And so we kind of coined the term auto-compositing, because if we go in here, so obviously the project asked us to tell us that what sort of environment that you're using, and then the project will use this to generate a nice reflection. All of the refractions here are being generated by a normal map, which is happening behind the scenes. So if we go into the projects here, we go into this normal map generator, this is taking our simulation and generating a normal map that can be used for the refractions. And so if we come into the compositing options here, we have, for example, the reflection strength. So if we put that up a bit higher, we'll see what that does. Typically it will sort of take what's happening up here in the image and apply it down here. So we should see, I suppose, the image become a bit more brighter, and it's also reflecting the dirt up there. I normally keep the reflection strength quite low, normally about 15 to 25, unless I really want to see what's reflected. If we have quite a dark background, not really necessary in this case because it's quite a bright scene, but we can increase this inherit scene refractions, and this will sort of make the water absorb even more of the environment. So you can see more of the sky is starting to get inherited by this. We can start to see this kind of orange color starting to appear up here as well. I think we'll keep going even higher with this. I'm probably starting to get, as you can see, it's probably going a bit too far here, so I like to keep that at a lower value. But if it was, for example, a different scene where maybe the entire scene was, say, on like a red, very dark room with a lot of sort of colors in it, and the water was darker, and we wanted to see that, this can definitely help. We got all these settings here for the refractions. So we have surface refractions, so if we put that to 0, we'll see all these little micro ripples will start to disappear. And you can see it becomes a very sort of low, so we still have the displacement, but all the surface ripples are gone. So definitely want to keep those. And then the wave height is the actual amount of distortion that the water has. So if I put the ripples to 0 and then we put the wave height to, say, 75, we'll see a much more dramatic displacement happening in the water. So we go before and after. You You see the displacement's got a lot stronger there. So if we had the displacement very high, we also have the smoothness of the displacement, so I could reduce this to 25, and that will give us smaller details in the more complex refractions. We don't want to go too complex because that's what our surface ripples are for, but there's two different types of displacement happening: the core displacement of the water volume and then the displacement of the surface ripples. So I'll keep these at the values that I think they were, which I think was something like that. And it's quite nice being able to just look at these compositing options here, because if we go click this button here, which shows the hidden layers, which can be useful, you can see the amount of stuff that's happening behind the scenes to generate this result, which is kind of verging on very complex. So there's the sort of specular reflections. Then we add some specular highlights to that. So these are the hot spots that have an additive transfer mode, so they're very bright. Then we have the specular foam, which is also the detail in the water. Then we have the Frenzel shader, which tries to replicate some of the light wrapping around the water. Then we have the actual turbidity of the water itself. Without this, it would sort of look very transparent, so that's what gives the water its sort of, I suppose, thickness, I suppose would be a word. Then we have some, if I disable all of these layers add reflections based on our reflection comp here. So we've got reflections that are added after the displacement. We've got some caustic effects, as you can see there. There's actually color there based on the environment. We have the water droplets, allows you to control the water droplets separately. We have some of the bubbles that are happening inside the water. And then we have some more reflections that are being applied underneath the displacement. So if we just enable everything again, in fact, let's just solo the displacement and the background. So we'll turn off all of the effects except for the water displacement itself. It doesn't actually look too bad, but if we go in here, we'll see everything that's happening. So first of all, we have the Caustics Effect. And this, we found, was able to sort of, more than just a displacement, but actually can get the refractions to sort of wrap around the shape of the water and the geometry, which is quite useful. Then we're just adding an animated turbulent displacement here, just to sort of mix it up a bit. And then we're adding a displacement map, which is actually using this normal map. Normal displacement map, which is this layer here. So when we add that, this starts adding some of those little tiny ripples. Then what we're doing is adding a median blur here, which will actually blur the pixels to give us a less defined result. Then on top of that, we add a second displacement, which brings out the ripples even more. Then we have another animated turbulent displacement to add an extra layer of movement on top of this. And then a few other effects just to resolve some of the sharp edges that can be observed. And so it's all of those effects in combination. When we enable everything, we end up with this effect. And because this will take a little while to render, have a pre-rendered version of this, which I'll just bring in. Because all very well and good if it looks nice on one frame, but if we bring this in, solo this layer, extend this a little bit, and then play this back, we can see everything coming together to generate a very convincing water simulation, which went through so many iterations. There was a point where, you know, we were struggling to try and get the bubbles to be visible and the displacement to not look too flickery. And the amazing thing about this is the only real simulation is probably the gravity of the water and the simple bounce physics settings for the water, but all of the displacements are, I suppose, what you would call screen space reflections, because the way you would do this in 3D is you would actually have the environment wrapped around the water, and then the water would sort of refract everything. So we're doing this in a much cheaper way and still managing to get a result that looks very realistic, just using the effects that are available to us in After Effects. Okay, so that's the compositing side. We didn't really have a chance to go into the particles comp, but if we do that, we can see, we'll just minimize some of this stuff, try and keep it. We don't want to bombard the user with too many options, so when you come in here, it's very easy to understand. There's normally this project overview. We've incorporated these project overviews into the fire and water projects. So if you're not too sure what is going on, the green layers are layers that control interactivity. For example, the controls, the user is supposed to come in here and experiment with how much, you know, turbulence, the size, emission rate, control the emission rate of the droplets separately, all of these types of effects, randomize the simulation, the length of the stream of water. And you can see here there's usually these tips included as well. Press U to see placeholder keyframes. So if we come in here and we solo this proxy simulation here, just to make things a bit quicker, just hide this for a minute and we'll have a look at what some of these keyframes are doing. Because rather than just giving you a static water ball, in all of the projects we've given you this sort of demonstration of what the project can do. So if you were going to create your own animation, you probably would want to select all these keyframes and just delete them and start from scratch. But for example, we have, say, when the water ball emerges, we slowly increase the size. And then when it starts to travel quickly, what we've done is, say, to make it look more thinner, in these scenarios, keyframing the height to be lower than the width, just so it kind of keeps that sort of, and then when it comes back into a ball again, increasing the emission radius, and then simply just the emission rate so that it does turn off at a point. This is just water drops emission rate, pretty standard. You just, at certain points, maybe you want to tone down the amount of droplets that are coming off the water ball. The turbulent amount, so basically increasing the turbulence during sort of fast movements when the water should be more unstable, and then lowering the turbulence once the water starts to settle. Gravity, so increasing the gravity is not actually pulling the water down, it's pulling the turbulence direction of the water down. So the ball will hover in the air, but yet it looks like water is still kind of traveling downwards, and that's because there's a turbulence field which is being animated downwards by this. And then there's just a few settings here. For example, in the beginning we wanted the stream to be longer, so we're keyframing the stream length to get this nice sort of long stream effect, and then when it comes into a ball we're lowering the stream length there. And of course you can come in here and change the path of the water, so you can create your own custom effects. And if we look at the overview text here, so this will just tell you about the particle controls, which is pretty much what we just did, but you know, if you're wondering what some of these do, you can just spend a moment just looking at this. For example, gravity affects turbulence, reduce when water is traveling upwards, kind of a tip there. Spherical field strength, what does this do? It pinches the tip of the water when traveling along a path. So this is all quite useful to know, giving you sort of the information you need as and when you need it without telling you to go watch an hour-long tutorial. But of course, we have the tutorials that you can watch, so it's properly documented. So let's, I think we have time to look at another project maybe. So everything we've just looked at was just this one project, and when you consider all of the different sort of results you could do with this one project here, you start to realize just how many possibilities there are. For example, there's this rising water ball splash, so this is a much larger, so this one is still loading. I imagine it's probably quite a large effect. Now, rather than trying to preview that at full res, I have a pre-rendered clip here. I think before I do that, I'll bring in the image that I was using for the background. Found this nice image of a stock forest, so I'll bring this in. Do the same thing as well to the reflection comp here. And yeah, we'll just preview this at full res as well. Just gotta disable these water ripples. Doesn't really make sense to have water ripples when the surface is in a forest. But in this case, to make sure the droplets are looking realistic, we're using subframe sampling motion blur here. And that's what's giving us these nice natural looking water droplets. And the first thing I did was just come into this color tone and say, well, we're in a more of a forest environment. So just did that, and then that makes quite a big difference once it loads in. You'd imagine the water would have more of a green tint to it rather than blue because it's in a forest. Quite a subtle effect, but you can see starting to take shape. And that was this effect once we rendered it. So we have this nice water ball in a forest. This was a slightly older version of the water, but we did some pretty nice work getting it to come out of the water here. So as the water is emerging, we just blended the water surface in there just so we didn't have a harsh line here as the water came out. but a completely different environment, and we can see just the ridiculous sort of results we're able to get with this water. And of course, you know, it put all this effort into making the displacements work and everything. And in terms of new water projects, we added this guided water flow project here, and have a pre-render of that. Basically, we had sort of really fast moving streams. We had all these like water balls that you can manipulate, and I wanted sort of something that was in between, something that wasn't as condensed as a stream but was a little bit more fluid than just a ball. And so we had this kind of nice sort of floating guided water effect here, which is just a little bit more, just another interesting choice. We now have these dual fireball manipulation projects. It's a lot more optimized, but it's still one of the more computationally intense projects, simply because of the insistence on having two separate fluid simulations in one project. Which is why in a project like this it has a note saying, please allow extra time for fluid sim to finish pre-caching. When it does impact the floor, this is why the proxy simulation is so important, so that we can just see what's going on. And let's see what this actually looks like when it's fully rendered. So this is how it looked before, and bear in mind it took a lot longer to render as well. And there's definitely improvements that could have been made to it. So now, if we transition between them, rather than having this very... well, it just doesn't deviate from the path much, but in the new version, it just looks a lot more organic, I think. And the fluids just work a lot better, and it's a lot more optimized compared to the old version, which was just looked a little not quite as good. I tend to use this Fire Blast manipulation project on almost everything. Pretty much, apart from flamethrowers, this fire manipulation blast seems to be, for me at least, kind of my go-to project. So this is the Fire Blast manipulation, and this is the project I pretty much use for everything. And if you want to see what this looks like when it's actually in action, these effects here, so you can see that's the project in action. Once it's tracked into the shot, you can see it's quite similar. So it's this effect here, probably with a few more particles. The faster it travels, the more particles it makes. So you can see there, that type of effect is the same type of effect that's being used there, just extended a bit. And what I love about the fire is that it just like somehow manages to hold up all the detail in the foreground, which is quite rare for a fluid simulation. And then we see it used again here as well. So this is quite a nice demonstration. And it worked well for all of these shots, but recently we started working on another project, and there's a lot of firebending shots in that, and we found that we needed a more advanced version of this Fire Blast manipulation project that could handle really rapid and very aggressive movements. So you can see it's a lot bigger than the other stuff. Looks a bit funky when it's on this grey background at half res. And in fact, normally what I'll do when I'm working with this one is I'll render these layers separately. So for example, I'll play around with the sparks, make sure I'm happy with the way they're looking. I'll play around with the billowing flames, make sure I'm happy with the way they're looking, and then also the main fire sim itself. If we come back here, have a pre-rendered version of this as well. Have a look at this. So it's a really powerful fluid simulation. Probably the most realistic one, especially when you see it in action. So we're really getting these fire simulations to look really realistic now. So that's what you get. You get the realistic ability to make your own custom sort of firebending scenes, and it gives you all the realistic heat distortions and everything, which saves you a lot of time. So there's 3 lightning projects that are included. There used to only be 1, but we added a few more to start to fill out this lightning category. So we have this Cascading Lightning effect now. We also have, this was the one that was there before, called Lightning Bolt. So it's a bit intense, quite flashy. And then we also have this lightning manipulation project. So I'm going to put this here. Dictate the path of the lightning more. So you could do that classic effect and then shoot a bolt of lightning. So, and of course with this one, I mean there's so many different lightning effects that look like this. So you can have fun with that. So that lightning category is almost like a whole world in of itself. Of course we have the flamethrowers as well. There's just so much in this, to be honest. Have the whole air category here. And we have all of the Earth projects. And I suppose one thing that's worth noting about the Earth, one thing that's probably not really explained, well I mean it's explained in the tutorial here, in this Earthbending tutorial, but there are Earthbending projects, for example like Earth Levitation, Earth Shield, but then there's these Earth Generator projects. So let's open up one of these. These generator projects are where you kind of create your own rocks. You can create your own pre-rendered 3D assets of rocks straight within After Effects without using any 3D. And that's what the big OBJ library of rocks that's included is for. So you can come in here and replace this rock chunk with any of the OBJ files that are in here. So we just bring in one of these and it will completely update this, and you can control the rotation, the light direction, how deformed the surface of the rock is, and you can create your own assets that are completely 3D as well. In fact, if you bring in the Proxy Simulation here, you can see exactly what's going on. And if you want to see sort of what this means when it's in action, we did a small breakdown video in this Cora project, and I think that's in here. So you'll recognize some of these earth generators. So we have all of these shots here, and then okay, so let's get to where we see the so that's the rock generator in action. So that's one of the presets, because if you come in here, there's actually all of these different presets for basalt, granite, limestone, moss rock, sandstone, volcanic rock, and of course your default kind of earth muddy looking rock. And then you can even customize each one of those further as well. So that's what we did here. We sort of just grabbed this granite rock preset, tracked it into the scene, added some rotation that coincides with the impact, and then you can bring that pre-rendered rock and use it in the earth levitation project. So once you have a rock that you want to use, you come into this earth levitation project, and now rather than it just being a rotating floating rock, so you can see we took that earth generator rock. It's being used in here by default, but of course you can come into this 3D rock asset pre-comp, replace the rock with one of the other versions, and then in the particles comp, you can see all your little guide layers here. You can solo this layer to improve performance. That's the Proxy Simulation. You can click on this layer to see the keyframes, so that's all there. Well, in here we have the rock debris color. So let's say you chose the sandstone rock, which looks kind of more orangey and red. Then you could select the kind of color that you want. Let's bring this all the way up to say 85, I think. Make it a bit more obvious. So obviously this rock would be a very different looking rock that matched the environment, and then you want the smaller debris to also match the rock that you had. So this is how you'd put together custom effects like that. And that's exactly what is covered in the Earthbending tutorial, which is here. It shows you right at the beginning how to create this. And then that's one of the other rock presets. So basically in the tutorial we create our own custom asset and we start matching it to the environment. Gradually starts to take form and get it looking better. And then we bring it into the earth generator, the earth levitation. We set up a custom animation, start adding in and coloring the rocks there till we get something that looks like this and it all matches properly. And then we render it and we have a go at compositing it, adding some extra touches just to get it looking good, and then finally we render the effect. And so it shows you step by step how to actually use Trapcode Elements. Okay, so I think we'll wrap things up there. Oh yeah, technical support. So okay, in there, that's where our email is. And we endeavour to sort of reply to your email within 24 hours most of the time. Obviously, I can't be at the computer 24/7, but I'm happy to go in depth and work through any issues that you have as well. So I'm always getting people asking about any sort of issues that they have. So it's not like you download the project and then you're left to figure it out yourself. There's a whole tutorial, you can get technical support, and of course this is just version 1.3. We've been updating it constantly throughout the year, so as soon as this update is available, which it will be if you've downloaded it, then we'll be working on version 1.4 and adding more things to it in future. In fact, we want to expand the ice category out significantly, and there's also more water effects that we're working on as well. In fact, yeah, there are lots of sort of projects in the works that we've got planned coming to Trapcode Elements. So, and they're only going to get more ambitious as well. We have some pretty ambitious plans for the future. So yeah, we'll leave it there and hope you enjoy using Trapcode Elements.